Anja Hartleb grew up behind the Iron Curtain in East Berlin and Moscow. She immigrated to the U.S. in 2001 and earned a bachelor's degree in philosophy, followed by two master's degrees, one in political philosophy and another in organizational leadership. A longtime lover of justice and liberty, she recently served the Liberty Movement as vice president of Intellectual Takeout, an educational marketing nonprofit. She is now going to give a brief talk about how liberty impacts emotional resilience, moral stamina, and individual and community well-being. So without further ado, here's Anja.
Good morning. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. Let's see. Is there a volume up button? How's this?
It's better.
Even better now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? All right. Oh, well, I'm so glad that you guys made it to my talk. I know it's early, anyways, for me. And when you're raising newborn twins, it's even earlier. So, what I would like to talk to you about today is really inspired by my 10 plus years in the movement, and particularly my professional work with Intellectual Takeout. One of the things that has puzzled me for quite some time, and just so you understand my background, when I came to the US, that was the first time in my actually first class in philosophy that I was introduced to Ayn Rand. And I really just blossomed reading her novels because it explained a lot of things that were going on in my life prior to coming to the United States, particularly with my family, which was which was obviously in East Germany, and my mother's parents were Stasi officials, so we were a very plugged-in family in the East German government. So Ayn Rand really explained a lot of things that were happening emotionally and family-wise to me. But it has always puzzled me since then why, despite the fact that she sold so many books, I mean, we're talking millions, tens of millions, the number of followers of her philosophy, and I'm talking broadly speaking, is really small. And why is that? Well, what I've come to realize through particularly working at Intellectual Takeout is that I think the movement has a messaging problem. And that has to do with the way the idea of liberty and the associated ideas of free market and limited government and so on and so forth really are just means to something bigger, to a bigger end. And I feel that a lot of times the movement isn't talking enough about this end and talking more about these means to that end. I'm an Aristotelian, so you have to forgive me for using Aristotelian language a little bit. I see that end as really flourishing. And of course, we can talk about the end from the left also, because I'm pretty sure that the left would say, well, our end is flourishing as well. But of course, the question is, how does this look like, and what are the means that will really achieve that end? And when we talk as a movement about liberty, I think we will be much more successful reaching people, reaching beyond the choir. And I think that's a big problem that we're having. When we properly situate those terms like liberty and free markets within that greater end of human flourishing. Now at Intellectual Takeout, what we did was start a social media campaign. Intellectual Takeout really started out as a website providing resources, research resources, particularly to college students who were being bombarded with a lot of the leftist, progressive terminology and ideology in the classrooms. And so we wanted to build a website where they could come and gather all the other different viewpoints on the particular topics that they were confronted with in college. And that started out primarily philosophy and history and political science, but we started covering the natural sciences, environmental sciences, literature, arts, everything. If you go to the Intellectual Takeout website today, it's huge. It's a huge library of content. So after we built that website, we started thinking about, okay, what are we going to do on the social media side? How are we going to reach people? And we started out with a very small Facebook audience, and our aim has always been to reach across the aisle, to reach beyond the choir. And so that really very much impacted the social media strategy we were using. And we started out with, less than 500 fans, and in about 2.5 years, we hit the 1 million fan mark. And what we learned in that campaign was that terms like liberty and free markets and individual freedom and all of that weren't resonating. And we were talking, the audience we're having wasn't particularly far off to the left or to the right. It was very mixed. And the more we started up nuancing the message and properly situating it within a larger context, within the deeper questions of what does it mean to be a human being, and what is our ultimate goal as human beings and as a society, how can we accomplish those goals, we gained more traction. We're playing a lot with messaging, and we could see on a daily basis what was working and what wasn't working. And when we talked about liberty, for instance, we were seeing that particularly from the psychological and emotional side, people were having a really hard time connecting to that. And I don't want to get too much onto my soapbox. Certainly there are huge factors here. There is the education system, obviously, which has completely liberated kids' ability to think foundationally, to think in terms that will make them actually understand concepts and abstract concepts and so on and so forth. So that's a huge problem. But I do also think that as a movement, we are not doing enough to give a concrete picture, something that really resonates emotionally and morally with a person. And the people within the choir probably very much disagree with me, but the people outside that choir, the people that we can bring into the choir, that's where I'm taking this from, talking to them. There are always going to be people we're not going to reach, obviously, right? My grandfather, for instance. Obviously you have to abandon the lost causes, but I'm talking about the vast majority of people who are somewhere in the center and who are really not grounded in anything. Another thing that we noticed, which was to me very unsettling, because I have a strong psychological positive history with the philosophy of liberty, is seeing people on our side, particularly young people, millennials, they would talk about liberty and freedom, more so freedom than liberty. And if you're a philosopher, you kind of understand probably that there are some differences, at least philosophers claim. As a philosopher, I've learned not to argue with philosophers. So I will leave that to the side. But with these young people particularly, they were using these terms like floating abstractions, as Ayn Rand would call it. And it became particularly unsettling when we were talking about very, shall we say, moralistic topics. Things where we are seeing there's definitely good and evil. The moral relativism that we were seeing in the younger followers was really astonishing to us. And I wouldn't blame the particular persons involved. I just think that that's sort of part of the messaging problem that I'm talking about. And let me give you a couple of examples. And this didn't just happen once. We would see that on a daily basis, especially when we talked about things like friendship, community, personal flourishing, family, self-realization, self-actualization. We were seeing people who were just from their comments and from their profiles, because when you have, you can usually see fans' profile pages. They were completely afloat. It was like they didn't really have any kind of net or grounding, morally or emotionally or intellectually. They probably were, in some sense, resorting to buzzwords. And I'll be the first to admit, as part of the movement, it's really easy to resort to buzzwords. So that was really disquieting to us. Now, when I'm talking about family, I don't want you to get the impression that I'm a Republican conservative, but I'm talking about the idea that we have biological and emotional grounding points that are extremely important. And anyone who has dealt with family issues knows how deep those can go. And on the flip side, how positively one's life can be affected when those groundings are intact. So we were seeing that. We were seeing a lot of, shall we say, personal moral decay, even within the people in our movement. Again, I don't want to sound too moralistic, but kids really engaging in meaningless relationships and just not knowing how to build a fulfilling and proper relationship. It's great to have liberty and freedom to pursue those things, but when you have no moral framework to really make that what it can be, it becomes downright dangerous. I don't want to psychologize too much, but it's hard to do that when you're reading thousands of comments every day from 1 million+ people. So, sort of about at the beginning of last year, as we were collecting our thoughts on all these things that were happening on our social media pages, we realized that we needed to talk about something else other than liberty. And we started to talk about flourishing. And I think that's really what turned things around. And might I say, it also turned things around with our donors. It was crazy. we were giving presentations to high-profile people who would write us checks on the spot. Because all of a sudden, they got the whole picture, and they got excited again. Mind you, of course, a lot of them were completely beaten down by the fact that Obama had won another term, and they were about to throw in the towel. But once we actually talked about a positive, holistic vision and how liberty integrates into that vision, they got psyched. And so I think that, especially if our aim is to reach more people than the choir, again, we need to really develop and visualize that greater vision of human flourishing. So that's sort of the nutshell of what I want to say. I don't want to really talk too much because I'm sure that you have some thoughts, and I'd rather have a good discussion about it. So, but you can ask me really any questions that you would like, obviously, related to my topic or, well, to me. So I hope I was able to give you some good or valuable insights. Go ahead.
What does this picture look? What does this picture look like in terms of creating a picture of human flourishing? How do you do that? And what's the picture that you're communicating?
Right. And I think that is the big question. I think that when you look at the left, I think the left has done a phenomenal job of creating emotional imagery and pictures and visions. And, you know, taking a page out of their playbook can really help us there. I think it starts with telling personal stories. And we tell a lot of stories about people being hassled and destroyed by the government. And we talk, and mind you, I think what ends up happening is that we talk more in defensive terms. We talk about defending liberty. We're talking about slowing the encroachment of government and all those things. But there are so many hugely positive things to talk about and positive stories to tell. So the personal story aspect, I think, is huge. You know, I mean, I can start with my own story, you know, and when I tell that story, people, that's what really engages people. It's not me talking as a philosopher about the abstract concepts or even the less so abstract concepts as they occur in our current events, you know, analyzing, you know, Obamacare and why it's so wrong and all that stuff. You know, I lose people fairly quickly, even very intelligent and, you know, people who love that stuff, but it's just not engaging enough. So I think it starts with personal stories. And it starts with really engaging with it also starts with really engaging with your audience. Now, intellectual takeout, in terms of engagement, not just the number of fans, but in terms of engagement, which is a really important number on Facebook, we beat Oprah. We beat Redbook. We beat huge audience sites on Facebook in terms of engagement. Why is that? Because we're looking at who our audience is. We're trying to figure out what it is that they're thinking and feeling when they're reading our posts and how they're reacting and where they're coming from. So it's a very hands-on, qualitative approach to engaging with your audience. So this is just from a tactical standpoint using social media, for instance. You know, I go on Facebook pages like Freedom Works or even the Heritage Foundation. And, you know, bless their hearts, I think the Heritage Foundation does, you know, a lot of good things. But I just want to rip my hair out when I read their posts because I'm so utterly bored by them. And I know that the people who are clicking on like, it's entirely the choir. But there's no really reaching beyond that and engaging beyond that. And I think that's a huge problem. I mean, as organizations promoting liberty, we can do that all day long just to keep our operations afloat. But does that really make a difference? In my experience, no. So it's great to have an $80 million budget, but when you just have to keep saying the same thing to the people who like you already to keep that $80 million budget, I don't know, that's not personally satisfying to me. Go ahead.
Okay, so, because that's what I'm seeing too. Like, I'm one who posts a lot of negative, darn, isn't this awful? And it doesn't resonate with people. And I think one thing is because it just, they don't know what to do with it. So what am I supposed to do about that? They feel there's a helplessness of, what do I do? So what I'm hearing from you is maybe if our message was more providing people with, like when you do look at the holistic picture, you're providing them with what they can do.
Yes.
How can they, keep going instead of just going, this is depressing, and I'm going to shut it off because it's depressing, so I'm going to block it out because I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with this information. Because complaining about it or getting with other people who want to just talk about it isn't accomplishing anything.
Yeah.
They intuitively know it doesn't accomplish anything, so they don't even step into the circle to talk about it.
Right.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's more maybe if we start providing, because people do respond great to positive things. They do respond when they hear, oh, I could go do that, or I could do this in my home, or with my neighbors.
Right.
I think people really do respond. Is that how?
Yes,
kind of what you're
and-
saying?
and that's
maybe
what-
if you could define flourishing.
Well, yes, I think that's a very good point, and that's exactly what we've been seeing. To just piggyback on what you were saying, I think it's very hard for individuals to get motivated when you're talking about the abuses of government. Because, gosh, the government it's so hugely powerful that, an individual, of course you're going to get overwhelmed. What can I do? I'm just little old Joe, a little tiny Joe trying to make a living here. And I think that's, in terms of increasing the movement and the energy for the movement, to me, it's like a death sentence almost going that route. But flourishing. I have thought a lot about this over the years. And to give you my own sort of journey, starting with objectivism and reading more and more and more and talking more with people, my idea of flourishing has changed a little bit in the sense that I went from a sort of more hardcore individualist stance to thinking about it in a more small c communitarian sense. I think that certainly the things that are within an individual, the capacities, the talents, the tools that an individual has at his disposal emotionally and intellectually, play a huge role in flourishing. Aristotle meant by flourishing really reaching your fullest potential as a human being. And that's all encompassing. That means emotionally, physically, professionally, in terms of your relationships, and so on and so forth. So, the individual components are definitely crucial, But another component to that is the people around you. It starts with your family. It starts with the people you love, your friends, the very small immediate community around you, your neighbors, and so on and so forth. And I think that we have a responsibility as individuals to, well, of course, do no harm, but also to further the flourishing of other people within our care. I see that, and I try to live by that as an organizational leader. I fail every day, of course, because it's a huge task. But, and I try to do that with my family, with my husband, with my friends as much as possible. And so I think that's something that we as individuals have to think about also. How can we assist others in reaching their fullest potential, even if it's just, giving some really necessary and wanted advice in a time of crisis, or helping someone out if they need money for something. I know people have different philosophies about lending money or giving money to other people. Sometimes, I'll tell you a quick story. My twins were born at 24 weeks. They were born 3.5 months before their due date. They're $1 million babies. They pretty much broke us financially, even though we had health insurance. I created a fund, and just people chipping in $25 to help us. That was enormous. And that was a crowdfunding campaign, by the way. And even within the movement, I think we can do a lot more of those things by showing that as a community, we can further the well-being and flourishing of others. So, that's a shorthand explanation. I don't know how satisfying it is, but that's kind of how I look at it. And a lot of it is really experiential. I'm not talking, we can talk about abstract concepts all day long, but really it starts with really concrete experience and doing things in your everyday life. Just one more thing. The reason why I'm saying this also is because I have personally and privately been contacted by a lot of people in the movement who feel very, very lonely, and they feel like they have no direction, they feel like they have no plan, they don't know where to go, how to get there. It was astonishing and very personally painful for me to see that. We need to do something about that, especially with the next generation, because we're going to lose them. So, but again, that's my personal experience, and you may very well have others, but yes?
I think I'm going to go back. By the way, I'm a NBI graduate, so you know how far back I go. That's the original Empire State Building. One of the thoughts, once you feel, or if you are reasonably secure, is to get involved in all the local public offices.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. It's not to get up and make it a soapbox. But if there's an understanding, even if it's in the back of your head, that you're that kind of person, and then you pick, if you are active in topics that impact on a lot of people because they happen to make sense. You're not explicitly stating objectivism or libertarianism, but you're certainly getting people to think positively about you. Now, and I'm school board president in our community at this point, and probably the biggest topic that we have is the taxation in Pennsylvania, because it's on your property and no other taxation for the schools. And we're 40 to 50% retired fixed income properties. Now, I know that 90% of them are Democrats, but I don't really care what party they're in, because it's going to impact on them.
Right.
Is are we doing this and destroying their homes and their future?
Yeah.
And I think that's good for everybody, is to pick topics like that don't say that you're tooting your politics, but they happen to be that are we doing this right or not, or are we doing it at expense of too many people?
I think that's a great point. I'll tell you another quick story. We were approached by a couple of folks down in Mississippi, old-time business guys, very plugged into the, familial business culture down there. They were telling us about a huge boondoggle that was taking place that nobody knew about. And they had tried for a number of years to stop it, particularly using the buzzwords that traditional good conservative Republicans use, and had gotten nowhere. The boondoggle was this. A huge power company decided to build a clean coal plant. And they were particularly encouraged by the former governor of Mississippi, Haley Barbour. If you know anything about Haley Barbour, you know that is, despite being a Republican, or maybe because of being a Republican, one of the most cronyist people in state government you can imagine. Of course, one of the reasons why he pushed so hard for this power plant was because his consulting firm had a huge stake in the company. So these two businessmen were very much aghast by the whole project, because initially it was approved for somewhere around $2 billion, and it was already running over the budget. By now, about 2 years later, it's over $5 billion for a clean coal plant. Now, this plant is situated in literally the poorest part of Mississippi. And if you know anything about how utilities work, you know that the way utilities recoup their investments into new infrastructure is by increasing rates on ratepayers, by getting that money back from the ratepayers plus a return on investment. This power company was going to settle the poorest people in the country with this $5 billion clean coal plant that was necessary in the first place. Especially with a view to the fact that natural gas prices were plummeting and would have been economically a much better deal for a region that has been economically depressed for decades, and especially through the recession suffered even more. So when we took over the public awareness campaign of this project, we stopped talking about those talking points. And we just talked about the one fact: this plant is costing the poorest ratepayers in the country so much they cannot go and, just make 2 minutes. They cannot, pay for their electricity, for their air conditioning. And by gosh, you need air conditioning in Mississippi. Air conditioning, and so on and so forth. We took a video of an elderly lady, for instance, who very much depends on oxygen, and her electricity bill has been going up already because the power company got the Public Service Commission to, even though the plant is not done, raise the rates already to recoup their investment, their started investment in this plant. So that's what we started talking about. We started talking about the insanity of this company making profits off the back of the poorest people in the country. And we get the environmentalists on our side. We got more publicity in the state of Mississippi than the biggest news outlets down there. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. You're talking about a concrete story and showing how it affects people, but also about, on the flip side, the positive things. If we really want economic development in Mississippi, this is what we have to do, showing small business owners who've built something great in a state, where that may be even more challenging than in other states. And we touted the positive things about Mississippi because there are positive things about Mississippi. Actually, in terms of a tax climate, it's fairly good for businesses. Those kinds of, so, we didn't just talk about, the evil power company. We talked about, okay, power company, you want to do something that you claim is going to be good for the economic development of the state, but does it really do that? And alternatively, what else can we do to reach the same goal? So, yeah, the local politics part, I think, is huge. I don't know how many of us feel very comfortable, because the first thought, for instance, in my head is compromising my values, but at the same time, when we talk about it from a standpoint of building bridges or making explicit bridges that are already there, I think we can really do a lot of positive things within our most immediate community and empower people within our most immediate community. Empowering them can go a long way toward ultimately changing the bigger communities and changing the country.
So just as a last question, what's
Microphone.
the takeaway, right? What is the thing that you can send us out of this room positively, feeling good, feeling like we're flourishing? What can you say to us that we can do that one thing? Because I can't go talk to a power plant in Mississippi, okay? There's a certain vagueness when you talk about all of this, not because you're not doing it right, but because it is vague.
Right.
What can I do when I walk out the door of Liberty Forum today, in the next month in my life, to help people flourish? What is, I tend to not let big government take care for me, and if I see the homeless person or the child that needs to be adopted as a teenager, then I'll do that and have done that. But what small step can we make in this positive movement that you're trying to share with us?
I think the first thing you need to do is go out and talk to people, especially people who you don't know in your immediate community or might not align with you politically, but really talk to them and talk to them about concrete, real things that impact them and have a discussion about, well, you know what, here we're sharing some values here, and how can we work together to achieve those things, even though we don't perhaps align on a political level. But let's just set ideology aside and look at each other as human beings and start talking about the things that impact us equally. So I would start with having conversations, and conversations outside, the realm of folks that you already agree with. That's been something that's been enormously positive, actually, for me. It sounds like a frustrating experience, and initially it was, because I was going into it with the thought that I need to convert them. But once I dropped that, boy, did I ever learn something.
Well, and don't you also I find when I'm trying to talk to people that I don't necessarily align with, that if I remind them that we have so much more in common than we disagree upon, it takes a lot of pressure off the conversation.
Exactly.
And so I would say that for me, that's what I'm pulling from you is
Yeah.
just try to get people to look like we're mostly in sync here. These few things. So let's talk about the positives that we are in sync with.
Yeah. And, just as a closing, I've gained a lot more traction talking to people who maybe politically I wouldn't agree with when I talked with them in terms of flourishing as opposed to in terms of liberty or free markets or whatever. It's pretty amazing. People grasp that concept, even though it sounds really high philosophical. They grasp it pretty immediately. And they get it more on an emotional level than they get anything like liberty or free markets or So try it. Well, thank you so much for listening to me and giving me the opportunity to talk. I feel free to approach me, ask me any questions. Don't be shy. I don't bite. I am a nursing mother, though, so there are brain cells on the floor all the way to my room. Are the babies here? Oh, no. We don't take them out to travel yet. They're too small. But they are doing phenomenal. I mean, they're exceeding medical expectations. So we are very, very blessed. Well, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your Liberty Forum stay.